Hi everyone, Gareth here. Just to let you know that if you would like to support the production of the Music Room podcast, you can. Just head to musicroompodcast.uk/support or click the link in the show notes. Okay, on with the show. Welcome to the Music Room. This time in the Music Room.
I don't know if you remember a movie called Interview with the Vampire. It had Ellie Goldenthal. It was a score by him. I heard that music, and before that I thought, oh, maybe I could figure this out on my own. That was the score that made me go, I don't know what he's doing.
Hello and welcome to the Music Room, the show where I chat with composers, songwriters and musicians about their formative years. We're getting stuck into the autumn, aren't we? Suddenly a bit cooler in the evening. Change the duvet yet? Put the heating on yet? Autumn is a good time to get stuck into creative projects, isn't it? What are you involved with currently? You can let me know via the links in the show notes or come and join the Music Room community group on Facebook and tell us there. In this episode, you're going to hear from LA-based composer Jason Brandt, who recently had a movie released on Netflix, and we chatted about that as well as how he got started in music. He also left a very cool retro item and some brilliant advice. ABC anyone? Listen on to find out more. But first, music stories. Music Room guest Ian Arbor has added his magic to movie Bolan Shoes, starring Timothy Spall and Leanne Best, as siblings who are obsessed with the late Mark Nolan and the music of T-Rex. The writer-director of Once, 2007, Begin Again, 2013, and the especially wonderful Sing Street 2016, John Carney is back with Flora and Son, a consistently enjoyable, music-infused, character-driven comedy set in his native Dublin. The movie's original songs were co-written by Carney and Music Room guest Gary Clark, with whom he also collaborated on Sing Street. You can watch that right now on Apple TV+. And that's Music Stories. Jason Brandt is a US-based composer who recently composed music for the film Camp Hideout, starring Christopher Lloyd and Corbin Bleu, for roadside attractions. Jason also scored the award-winning film Max Winslow and the House of Secrets, starring Chad Michael Murray, Freddie, starring Kelly Hu, and Christmas Wonderland. Other films include Night of the Living Dead 3D, starring Sid Haig, and documentary That Guy Dick Miller. Jason also creates original music for a wide range of national TV programming, including Cartoon Network's Teen Titans Go and Mike Tyson Mysteries. Ready to catch up with Jason? Here we go. Jason Brandt, welcome to the Music Room.
Thank you for having me.
You are very, very welcome. You're all the way over in Burbank, is that right? In California?
That is correct, Burbank, California.
And I see a lovely room behind you. Many guitars. I can see at least 3 there.
You can see some fun there.
Oh, wow. Some synthy goodness as well. Oh, right.
Synthy goodness.
You like your guitars and analog hardware. It is clear from first glance at your studio.
It's a whole bunch of stuff there. I think I got a Kemper and way too many Mac Minis to go with everything. So
That's amazing. So what have you had going on today?
Well, today I'm getting to talk to you. I'm writing music for a couple of different shows. Teen Titans Go is one, and as well as TMZ. And then I have a movie that I'm working on that's coming up to be announced, and things are good.
Fantastic. I want to ask you about Teen Titans Go in a little bit. But
Sure.
you also have a new film out, Camp Hideout, don't you?
That is correct. It comes out this Friday, September 15th.
How did that come about? And can you tell us a bit about your working process for that?
Certainly. I got on this film. We finished it about a year ago. It's taken a little while to get to this point, but I got hired at the beginning of last year, and it's an old friend of mine, a college friend named Sean Robert Olson. We went to the University of Arizona back in the day, and we've been friends forever. He's a 4-time Emmy Award-winning editor, and he also does lots of directing. And we've done maybe about 10 feature films, a ton of short films, and a ton of TV shows together. But the last 3 films, Freddie, Max Winslow and the House of Secrets, and now this one, Camp Hideout, is probably my 3 favorite of them all. And the process for this has been fun. It took a little while to get hired onto it because, you know, when you go from one group of producers to the next, it's almost like starting a brand new business every time. So, you're hiring new people, getting all the financing in place, and but all the producers have been fantastic. I absolutely love them. The process started with Sean first, after he shot the movie, he edited it, and then he showed me a work print, and we just discussed things, had a certain direction. There was a temp track that was a little more orchestral at the time, but then as time went on, we started to realize we wanted it to be a little more specific to what the film is. It's a camp movie, it's a kids film, and it's got Christopher Lloyd in it. And we grew up with him because of Back to the Future and Addams Family and a bunch of other movies. And so we thought it'd be more fun to just, every time you go camping, there's always someone with an acoustic guitar and there's some whistling and some singing and snapping and clapping and all that stuff. So all that's incorporated in there, plus an orchestra and plus all these other things, when you get to the emotional scenes. So the way I approached this specific one, the main character's name is Noah, and he's a foster kid who is running away from two bad guys. They're two guys that hire him to steal something, and then that heist goes wrong, and so now he's hiding in a camp away from them. And so he thinks he's cool, and he thinks he's a certain kind of guy. So a lot of funk music, kind of edgy spy music from time to time. That's kind of the soundtrack in his head. That's kind of how I approach that. And then a lot of people have mentioned kind of like Home Alone vibes and stuff like that. So you'll notice that the two bad guys who are playful and fun in their own way. This is definitely a family film. The music kind of follows their journey as well. And then when you meet Falco, which is the Christopher Lloyd character, I mean, he creates an amazing character. He's as legendary now as he was back then. And I got to write very cool themes for him. He starts off as the dark, brooding guy. And each one of these characters has their own theme. The camp has a theme, as does, these are all lyrical. They're more melodic, which is nice because, as time has progressed, it's not, a lot of movies want to be more neutral and they want to have more ambient pulse or those kind of things, or just let the drums push it forward. But in this case, it's vibrant. It's fun. I mean, I'm using at least 3 or 4 different guitars for different themes and then different ideas. It's got a huge palette, so you're not bored.
Yeah.
I wasn't.
Yeah.
And it just moves. It cooks. It's a good, fun film. And you'll recognize this kind of fun vibe.
Absolutely.
We've seen many times.
You mentioned Home Alone. That's what I got from the trailer, actually, was...
I feel like they were going for that,
Yeah.
which is not a bad thing to do because that's a fun kids film and we're trying to reach parents as well. And
Absolutely. You have something like Home Alone with Christopher Lloyd as well. What's not to like? It's just looks like tremendous fun.
It was.
Well, best of luck with the release, and
thank you.
Hope it all goes well. So you mentioned before recording that you're a proud dad to a 7 and a 9-year-old. And
yes.
I was wondering about your variety of work from kids animation to horror. It's a wide spectrum there.
Right.
Has having kids affected your decision making in any way?
It has. When I was starting out in Hollywood, I mean, you take anything you can get and you don't really think much about it. And a good gateway into Hollywood is horror movies. If you can get someone scared, you can, or thrilled, or you move them in some way. I mean, that's a great way to get started. As it progressed, by the time I had kids, I got married, had kids, I realized I could show them almost nothing. That was really surprising to me. And I decided to make an effort, like I should probably do more things that they can see. In fact, they've been in 1 or 2 of them as extras, and one of them was so upset that they weren't in it. I was like, "You weren't born yet. Like, don't be upset." So I'm still trying to get an opportunity for that child. So if anybody needs a 7.5-year-old extra, that I could score, that'd be amazing.
Absolutely.
But it has changed a bit more because now this audience, we all chase our childhood. You and I could sit here and talk about movies that changed us when we were kids, when we discovered it. And we're all still going back to that early magic, that little bit of fire that happens. And even when we get tired of, all the crap that happens in Hollywood, you still go, well, what makes me tick? What made me want to do this in the beginning? And it's those early movies, those early things. And I want to be a part of that narrative for all kids, especially mine. And one of the things I noticed in all those movies, they had melody and there was orchestra, there were live players. There was a little bit more fun. It's kind of an exaggerated experience of what's going on in the narrative. Because if you were just to watch these things without music, it would be flat. It wouldn't be as interesting. But when the music comes in, it's much more vibrant. It moves. And I want my kids to see that, and a piece of my childhood will show up in everything I'm working on. And then hopefully they like it, and hopefully we can talk about it. But they've seen this movie, they laughed out loud. So, and we'll see it again this weekend. I hope they're excited. So.
Target audience, isn't it? It's if you're satisfying
Yes,
them, then that's just amazing. And yeah, and especially in the community of composers for TV and film, there is this touchstone of seeing movies when you're kids,
yeah,
and having that major inspiration to now do what you do. And certainly with a lot of my guests, they hark back to, oh, it was this movie that started everything,
right,
or this movie, or John Williams or
sure,
Morricone, or it could be anything.
yeah. Those are all amazing composers.
So, as someone who's also scored kind of zany animated comedy, I have to ask you about Teen Titans Go, which looks tremendous
Sure.
fun. You said you are working on it at the moment.
Yes, I've been working on that show since 2013. It's
Wow.
funny, when I got started, they had low expectations. They're like, "We're just going to break even. We don't know. It's just do as much as you can." And it started with like 52 episodes, and I'm not the only composer on it. There are other composers, and we get to contribute in different ways because the show moves pretty fast. And but I mean, it turned out to be a real success. By the 2 or 3 years in, I remember going to like McDonald's or something, and they were selling Teen Titans Go toys. I was like, "Oh, we're doing fine." So the show was fun. I mean, it has a lot of, again, that vibrancy. We do cartoons a little differently now because I grew up on Bugs Bunny and some of those where they're really hitting every point. And here, it's a little bit of talking, then they go into a thing. So they're moving it around a bit.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, it's something I
it's fun.
noticed that there was a team of composers, but
Yes.
what I wanted to ask you was, do they all work at the same time, or has it been a bit of a relay race, or how does that all work?
Yeah, it's kind of basically what we're doing is for that show, depending on the time and energy, they have to, they're editing these things, and sometimes they have a graphic that they can work on that where we can write music to that. But many times they have music that we've already used, and then they're just reusing that piece over and over again. That's not uncommon at all for that show. They have typically, I mean, I want to say there was about 52 episodes in the first season or two, and so there a lot of music that we had written that's building into a library, and they'll reuse it in other cases, just like the main title gets reused over and over, and the end titles. And so all of that just is just a work in progress. And I'm not in all the meetings with other composers at all, so I'm not sure how they're all approaching it, but
Wow,
it's been fantastic fun on that.
that's a quite a unique way of doing things.
Hmm.
Not experienced that myself. Okay, right. Well, shall we go back in time and find out how it all
Yes,
began for Jason Brandt?
let's do it.
Excellent. Okay.
Hit me.
So here we are back in time, Jason.
Here it is.
That was seamless, wasn't it? It's
That
just
was beautiful.
amazing. So, what are your earliest musical memories?
My earliest, for sure, would have to be I had some family members that played piano and guitar. My mom did play piano and guitar. My father was a minister in a Lutheran church, and my mom they would go to nursing homes in different places, and she would perform, and then she would perform a little bit at home. The big life change, of course, it's Star Wars. I mean, I was born in '73. That movie comes out in '77, and my goodness, that hit me like a ton of bricks. The other thing is, I had an aunt that would take that soundtrack and play it in the car wherever we were driving, and it never occurred to me that, wow, this music, film music doesn't always sound good separated from the picture. And in this case, it did. I just saw it as music, and it retells the whole story. I mean, you have that beautiful fanfare, and then it goes into a different mood only about a minute and a half later, where it's very dark and it's filled with action. You can just hear the story beat by beat, cue by cue, scene by scene. And I just remember seeing the movie once or twice, but then hearing that soundtrack over and over again with those car rides. And I just thought, wow, that's amazing. And it just stuck with me for years. It never occurred to me that I want to do that. But that was a big thing. I've had a number of instances in my life, which I'm sure you have too, where, maybe when you got MTV as a kid and then you started seeing music videos and you're like, oh, wow, they're doing it weird. Because now you're seeing live players in a way that you wouldn't normally see. Now we have the internet, so it's no big deal. You can see, anybody perform, a Russian symphony or American symphony, or, Leonard Bernstein, who's not alive. You can watch all that now. But back then you had to buy a VHS or something, and then maybe you'd see a little bit on PBS. Now it's at demand, but at that time it was very exciting to just see anybody perform live, and that was always informative. And so I had times when, first it was Star Wars, and then MTV came along, and I wanted to play guitar and then play piano, and I had a number of lessons throughout life. But the spark of music is always interesting. It always goes back to your childhood. Somehow it always does. We're always kind of chasing that.
Well, I mean, I was born in the same year as you. And for me, it's Star Wars. It was the first film I went to see at the cinema. And I remember standing behind the seats when Darth Vader was just, peeking. And yes, probably the first moment that I kind of reconciled that music and the image can be such a powerful force together. Pardon the pun.
Sure.
But yeah, and I think for a lot of TV and film composers, it's the same story. I hear it over and over again that, it hit them like a ton of bricks when they were little.
It's a very exciting time, because if you remember, even going through the 80s, every month you'd hear a new composer that did something amazing, like Jerry Goldsmith, Ennio Morricone, Alan Silvestri, Thomas Newman, all that early Danny Elfman stuff, and just watching him grow from Pee Wee Herman Big Adventure to Batman, just in that 4 or 5 years, is really interesting. So you're hearing a lot of vibrant music in the pop world, but then you go to the movie theater and you're hearing a good hour sometimes of classical music underscored throughout, and to hear all that, I mean, I just feel very fortunate that I was born at that time to experience all these things, where the narrative of music is just very big and fun. Yeah. There's a lot to learn.
So I guess you were quite influenced by the fact that your parents were musical. Mm-hmm. Were there any other influences that were steering you towards, picking up instruments and learning?
Headbangers Ball was a big, when I was watching MTV as a kid, I was like, I should play guitar. That looks good. I started with drums because I thought that would be easier, and then I couldn't find a guitar player to jam with. I was like, well, maybe it can't be that hard. And I was right. With time and, persistence, time and pressure, you can do anything. And I've learned many instruments that way, and some with lessons, some without. But it was just the environment at the time. It was just very exciting. And then going to concerts, whether they be rock concerts or classical or jazz, just seeing live players, just living, breathing, fun, and just watching the audience experience it. It's interesting because so much of music now is written on computers, and things are very quantized and it's very compressed. But it wasn't like that. Most music for a long time, the dynamics of an orchestra is very quiet and very loud. And there's something about that I feel like we've kind of lost in today's music, in today's world, where it's always kind of like a compressed clamshell, going over a hamburger. I really appreciate what we saw in the 70s and the 80s and the 90s, just kind of going, and all of that was inspirational, and it's still fun to revisit.
Absolutely. And so you mentioned the drums, you went to the guitar. Did you have lessons on the guitar? Are you self-taught?
I definitely did the guitar lessons. The honest answer is when I started piano lessons, because, I started hearing Star Wars and hearing all these amazing things, and you're hearing it in your head. And then you start piano playing Hot Cross Buns or Mary Had a Little Lamb. It was frustrating. I didn't like it. I hated my piano lessons. It took a while to get into it. And it was the gateway for that was then drums and guitar. And I definitely had lessons for each, but, some teachers get you, sometimes they don't, so if you're introduced to the right thing and you're in the right space and you're inspired, I mean, it's all about curiosity, ABC, always be curious, just keep going and going and going. And the more, I'd hear something, sometimes being self-taught can be advantageous. My technique is not perfect, but I sure enjoyed the process of getting there. And all the lessons I've had, I mean, guitar, piano, drums, bass, and then composing and conducting and all those things have been very helpful. But it was a little rocky in the beginning because, what you want to do isn't what you're technically able to do. And so it just took a while of being impatient. And then, I didn't have that patience. So sometimes you just have to do it. Just do it.
Yeah.
Mistakes
absolutely.
and all, it's fine.
Yeah, that's an interesting route then. So what kind of route did you take into composing? Did you learn the theory and go through college and stuff like that? Or did you just furrow down and figure it out yourself? Because, I mean, both are equally as valid.
They are.
it's quite a personal journey to have, isn't it? Really.
It is. It really is. The thing is when I started playing guitar, some of my favorite guitar players were Joe Satriani and Steve Vai and Eddie Van Halen and Steve Ray Vaughan and Jimi Hendrix. And to really understand what they're doing on guitar, whether it's rhythm or lead, you're going to have to learn a little bit of music theory. And I remember there was another one, Randy Rhoads, he used to play with Ozzy. And after you learn your major and minor scale, there's all those modes in there. And I spent a long time learning those modes and learning theory on guitar that eventually, at the same time while I'm doing all this, I'm listening to soundtracks. I'm just starting to collect. I had like Dance with Wolves, Silence of the Lambs, of course, Star Wars. And I'm reading books while listening to that in the soundtrack, in the background. And I'm really impressed with all the layers that are in that. And so the big gateway for me, I read an interview with Steve Vai, famous guitar player, who had, when he was a kid or somewhere in his youth, a 4-track recorder. And he said, I'm just going to write a bunch of compositions on my guitar. So on that 4-track recorder, I had a drum machine, a bass, and usually 2 guitars. You could bounce those tracks. You take 3 tracks, record it into 1. And then all the way, if you keep bouncing tracks, you can get up to 7 tracks. So I made a deal with myself to write a piece of music every day in the summer of '92 and then never play it for anybody. So I had the ability for it to be terrible and just get through it. But that was the most educational experience I had, where you just force yourself to write. I mean, composition is just like learning violin or any other trade or instrument. You just have to keep doing it and be willing to fail. And that's what I did. It was on guitar. And then I started taking composition lessons formally. Right after that, I wanted to know more. And I got like a Korg X2 and it had 16 tracks on that, which was huge in 92 or 93. I think that now it's the year after. So
Yeah.
93, I got this huge thing and it's a workstation and you're able to record all these things with MIDI. It was just a whole new world. And so through experimenting, and then the lesson really is just your ears and looking at scores. I mean, you want to learn about Bach, you just listen to Bach and look at it and then study it and then hear the players. And then same thing with John Williams. You want to do it, try to get it under your fingers. A piano reduction, a good piano reduction, getting things under your fingers really, really helps. And then you go, oh, wow, he's moving a lot. He's doing this, this, and this. And then the way he wrote it for the strings, it's all separated. That's all fascinating stuff. So that was kind of the gateway of just being curious and just keep going after it, being willing to fail. And then eventually finding people who were willing to tolerate some mistakes. And then it's a collaboration. And then we're all making okay films to really good films. And
yeah,
it's gradual.
Yeah. So I was going to ask, was there a moment where in amongst all that, you decided, oh, actually, I want to do this for a living? Or did the opportunity come at you without, you realizing? How did that come about? And what was it?
Yeah, I would have to say there was, for a long time when I'm a kid, you're like, I'm going to be a rock star. That's what I want to do. I'm going to try to be Eddie Van Halen or the next Kirk Hammett or whatever it is. And the music industry changed immensely. By the time Nirvana came in, I don't know, you remember the transitional thing between one thing to the yeah. And I
guitar
realized
music was
maybe,
back.
Yeah. And I remember thinking maybe I don't want to just play heavy metal guitar or rock guitar for the rest of my life. Maybe there's other things. And that's when I started to listen to, I was already listening to soundtracks, but I was thinking about it more of how if I was to write for media, I could write in any style. The great thing about film scoring is anything you've learned in life, a piece of music you heard when you were a kid, you could maybe use that. Something you heard in college, maybe you can use that. Something you heard 10 minutes ago, you can use that. I mean, we're always taking from the universe and then reinterpreting. Just like this conversation, we're just improvising now back and forth. So, some of this could end up in a composition in its own way. You could say something like, you should check out this artist, then I do, and then it's amazing. And then you're inspired by that, and it just goes and goes and goes. And so for me, the big point, I don't know if you remember a movie called Interview with the Vampire. It had Elliot Goldenthal. It was a score by him. I heard that music, and before that I thought, oh, maybe I could figure this out on my own. That was the score that made me go, I don't know what he's doing. And there's no sheet music for this. They're not releasing film scores on paper. Because he's got these things where there's horn rips in it, and then the horns are slowly bending and twisting, and then he's doing all these extended techniques, not familiar with at all, but it was amazing. It was absolutely amazing. I'm hearing magic in a different way that John Williams is bringing magic, and all these other composers are. So around 94, at the end of that, I was like, I should do music for medium, for film, and I realized I could do it for film. That was the goal at the time, and then television, video games, commercials. It's an endless thing. And since I play all these different instruments, there'll be a home for everything. And that's been my experience. Any piece of music I've ever written, there's a home for it. Somebody needs it somewhere, and there's nothing wasted. So that was kind of the game changer for me around '94 with Elliot Goldenthal, and then that rabbit hole of these amazing composers that I would have written off prior. I'd be like, I don't know what I do with this, but then same thing with the movie The Shining. You hear all these in 2001. There's all these extended techniques from Xenakis and Penderecki, and you're like, how are they doing that? Then you see the notation for it, and you're like, yeah, I was never going to guess that. It's like an arrow with every instrument playing the highest note for 30 seconds. And you're like, oh, they're improvising that, and it's a different style altogether. So
Yes.
all of that got my wheels turning, and I was like, this is super exciting. And at the end of '94, when I saw Interview with the Vampire and listened to that soundtrack a million times, I realized I want to do that kind of thing, and it went from there.
All the way through to Camp Hideout.
All the way to Camp Hideout.
Yeah. That's wonderful, Jason. I ask all of my guests to leave an item and a piece of advice in the music room for others to find. What advice would you like to leave in the music room for anyone who would like to hear some?
I have a couple of things. The first one is just take big risks. Bet on yourself. Get the education you want to get. If you think it costs too much, maybe but you're worth it. You have this one life. You really should run towards it. My biggest regret every time, once I've achieved something, I was like, I could have gotten here earlier if I had just taken more risks. I could have done this. It's like coming to Hollywood. I was 26 years old. I went to USC to do that, and I knew I was going to stay here. But even then, like maybe I could have gotten here earlier. I could have done more. Even with what I'm doing now, like I'm getting to talk to you and doing interviews. Maybe I should have hired a PR. Impact 24 has been amazing. I should have probably called them 20 years ago. Over and over again, I've had this experience of like, this is great that I've succeeded, but I arrived with a certain amount of fear, and I probably should have just leaned in more with that. So that's one piece of advice. The other one, when I was at USC, Christopher Young, great teacher, great composer. He said something amazing that's stuck with me since then. He said, Hollywood is the land of dreams, but it's also the land of broken dreams. There are some people that do want to see you succeed, but many others only go so far, and they don't want to see you succeed. And you kind of have to be wary of that. It's a weird problem, because you think, oh, everyone's rooting for me to succeed. Not so much. There are some people that only went so far, and then they get bitter. You see that with family members, that kind of hold you back and go, you're not that good. I've known you since then. This is what you're capable of. Don't do that. Don't believe them. You write your own story. Go as far as you possibly can. Bet big on yourself. And be wary of the people. There are some people that are rooting for you, and they are dreamers, and they want to do this. And then there are those that they're only meant to go so far. They're going to plateau. And so that's kind of my advice, is just bet big on yourself. Stay away from the negativity. Take breaks. Channel what you did in your childhood. Why are you here? Why are you doing this? Are you doing it because you love something? That's what's going to drive you over and over again. And, that's ultimately it.
Yeah, I love that. I love the run towards it, just go full on. And I liked earlier on you said ABC, always be curious. I think that's a great bit of advice as well. That's going in the music room for you. And do you have an item that you'd like to leave for others?
For me, I would have to say, in time, if I went back, part of what nurtured me anytime you get trying to navigate being a teenager and going through all that, I had a cassette Walkman, one of those Sony's, and I had a headset on all the time throughout high school, then into college, and just the constant listening to music and listening, and just any device that delivers music to my head is huge, because I'm always listening to it. And if I'm, cooking food for the kids, guess what? I'm going to listen to music. If I'm running an errand, I'm going to listen to some music. So I'd say, a pair of headphones with, now it's an iPhone, which is great because I can fit thousands of CDs on it. If you drove in the car with me in the early 2000s, you'd be like, it's messy in here. I'm like, yeah, just don't put your feet on all my CDs, because you never know what you want to listen to back then. Now it doesn't matter. But that was a game changer for me, just having, an iPod and now iTunes in general, and just being able to channel anything. So any mood. So if I'm in the mood for, Sinatra, and I just want to get that in my headspace, or if I want to hear some Thomas Newman or, Pantera or Stravinsky, whatever it is.
It's that's
probably my favorite thing.
It's a whole music education in your ears, isn't it? Really?
It is. All the answers are in those recordings every time. And there's still, you listen to it today, but next year it's going to sound different, and it's going to be more important. As we age, we grow with certain recordings. And I'm so thankful for, having, again, being born when we were born, to hearing all this music from the 70s, 80s, and 90s as it happened, in time. Because now when you look back, you're like, how do you listen to Jimi Hendrix? And then you have to advise them in the order it came. How do you watch Star Wars? Please watch it in the order it came. Don't go rogue and play these things out of,
Controversial.
Right. It is controversial, but the way it was delivered to us, please hear it that way. I don't hear greatest hits. I don't believe in greatest hits recordings of any kind. Go back to the, if you want to hear the Beatles, start in order, if you can.
Yeah.
Because and that's ultimately it. So, iTunes, iPod, headphones, go.
But what worked for you was, did you say the Sony cassette Walkman?
At that time, yeah.
Yeah. With the foam earphones.
Yeah, I used to have a paper route, and so I would have to go through sprinklers, and all sorts of terrain on a bicycle while throwing newspapers. Back in the day, that's how you got the news. It was on paper, and then we would deliver it. And so I had a cassette, and it was waterproof. So it was this big, bright yellow waterproof Sony Walkman with these big, bright yellow, thin headphones. And every day for an hour and a half, I'm delivering newspapers, listening to various things. Whether be Van Halen or be Beethoven, whatever it was keeping me moving, and I still do that. I have not outgrown this process.
Well, that's fantastic. And if that worked for you, then the big yellow Sony waterproof Walkman goes into the music room, because it would clearly help someone else, and probably nurtured your love of the album rather than just picking random tracks.
Absolutely.
So that's another reason to put that in.
Yeah, it's funny because all the albums I listened to back then, I'll listen to it in order of this track listing that they had. I don't do that now. Now I'll get a recording. I'm like, I actually arrange things by tempo. I like things faster, and then I go slower. Because whatever it is, high energy, I'm like, it's a go. Like Ennio Morricone, he's very interesting. Some of the most beautiful music he's written, but those are slower tempos. John Barry's like that, like Dance with Wolves, and very slow tempos. And those are the ones I'll still listen to in order because it's programmed a certain way. But if it's a recent rock album and it doesn't matter, and I feel bad about that. But if I'm listening to Metallica's Master of Puppets, it'll be Battery, and then Master of Puppets, straight on through all those songs. So
that is going into the music room along with your advice. It has been a joy chatting with you, Jason. Lovely to meet you. Thanks for joining me in the music room. You
too. Thank you for having me. It's an honor to meet you, and I look forward to hearing your music.
Thanks for listening to the Music Room podcast today. If you'd like to know more about the show or the community that surrounds it, head to musicroom.community. The link is in the show notes.